It's somehow already time for a list of my favorite games of 2016, and this time I've decided to tackle it a little differently than I did last year. This time around I've limited myself to a top 5 with the games in order of how much I enjoyed them, with the list ultimately culminating with my favorite game of 2016. Last year all I had was an amorphous list in no particular order with a game of the year. Doing a top 5 in order forced me to really think about every game on the list and where it belonged, which in turn makes it a more meaningful thing. And with that, it's time to dig in. Superhot is one of the few indie games that I was actually looking forward to in 2016, but when it came out it was subject to pretty harsh user reviews on Steam, which convinced me to pass on the game entirely for months. The majority of those negative reviews were based on Superhot being rather short for the asking price, and even though I ended up enjoying the game, I don't disagree with that sentiment. Those people aren't wrong. This is a $25 game that took me less than 2 hours to complete, but for me, that doesn't change the fact that the 108 minutes I spent playing of Superhot were immensely enjoyable. I guess I'd be more inclined to complain about the price if this were a Firewatch type situation where I wasn't satisfied by the end of my playthrough, but Superhot isn't like that. This game certainly could have dragged on longer, but I think that would have been to its own detriment. It does what it needs to do and says what it needs to say without overstaying its welcome. Superhot's marketing pitch is that time moves only when you do, which is the most efficient way possible to describe the gameplay. Even if you're not a huge FPS fan, this game still might be enjoyable for you, as it doesn't play like a traditional shooter. It's more like if you could manually control Fallout 4's VAT system in real time. Similarly to Fallout 4's VAT system, time doesn't stop completely, but instead permanently moves at like 0.5 frames per second for the duration of any action, such as shooting a gun, moving your character, or throwing something. The game will play back at full speed. Superhot nails its style well. It's part Mirror's Edge with a world portrayed in shades of white and gray, with everything dangerous and red, but also a little Hotline Miami as well, with these faceless goons coming at you in claustrophobic environments and scenarios. It even manages to work in a narrative which caught me completely off guard. The context here is that you play as someone chatting on a computer with an online friend who sends you an unfinished, pirated game called superhot.exe. Everything in Superhot is in character, even the menus, which are actually used as part of the narrative more than once. There's even a point where you have to quit the game, not on the game's imaginary computer, but on your actual real-life computer in order to progress. This game is just too easy to recommend. It's a nice, short burst of fun, and if that price tag really does bother you, then add it to your wish list and pick it up on a Steam sale. Titanfall 2 is easily the best FPS package of the year, delivering on what the original game proposed 2 years ago. The multiplayer component is vastly improved over the original, and if that wasn't enough, Titanfall 2 also manages to pack in a great single-player campaign, which I don't think anyone was expecting considering that the first game infamously didn't even include one. It's a 6-hour-long good time, chock full of good ideas that harken back to Xbox and PS2 era games like Time Splitters. When it comes to the multiplayer, Respawn has listened to and addressed nearly every complaint that players had of the original. Titan customization has been completely reworked, and there's tons of guns, equipment, and abilities, and all of this comes together to make matches more dynamic and interesting. It doesn't end there either. This time, Respawn is regularly putting out free DLC like Halo 5, which includes new weapons, maps, and even Titan augmentations. There's not much more to say about Titanfall 2, but it hasn't been getting a lot of attention, and I think that's a shame considering how good it is and how much it improves upon the original. Regardless of genre or setting, whether it's third person, first person, or on a two-dimensional plane, there exists this genre of indie games that follow an extremely similar formula that delivers story bits at the exact same cadence, always with a plot twist 2/3 in that ends up being a red herring that was a false plot twist and then goes back to being boring again, with an ending that makes you feel as if you wasted your time and money. Games such as Gone Home or Firewatch, both of which I found to be profoundly disappointing. For whatever reason, these games always seem to get high critical acclaim and are well received by just normal people online as well. Being the kind of person that I am, curiosity and not wanting to be left out of the conversation usually leads to me playing these games even if I'm inevitably setting myself up for disappointment. Inside absolutely shattered that expectation and was far more adventurous than I could have ever imagined or asked for. It's indie studio Playdead's follow-up to Limbo, a game that I still have not played but just about everyone else has. Inside is a 2.5D platforming game where you play as a young boy just like Limbo in a dystopian setting, and as you progress deeper into Inside's world, things just get worse and worse. Mechanically, this game is incredibly simplistic, but the areas and puzzles themselves are brilliantly designed. Nothing here is going to blow your mind with how complex it is, but you'll find yourself momentarily stumped only to backtrack and figure out that you've missed something. The game gives you little to no instruction on how to play, but it's designed very intentionally around that. There's little to no extraneous nonsense in this game, instead it's a refined example of minimalism in game design, where everything is there for a good reason. It's an eerily quiet game too, with only creepy background sounds, the sound of your own movements, and brief bursts of an ambient soundtrack to comfort you. It actually turns out that the soundtrack was made by playing sounds through a human skull and recording the result, which is somehow one of the less fucked up things in this game. Inside never pretends or acts as if it has some grand point to make, and I'm not really sure if it does. You could sit around and theorize about what it means and dig as deep as possible, but you don't have to in order to enjoy it, which I appreciate. If you're someone like myself that's become wary of these indie games that seem interesting but almost always end up being hollow, unsatisfying experiences, then I urge you to give Inside a chance.
More console-like experience. You were right there. You played those games. It wasn't my fucking dreams.
Yeah, I have.
No, you were there. You were. What was I? Was I with your fucking twin sister? That was you. You don't have to be afraid. You know, I'm here. We're in the Chrome Castle. We're not leaving here. Never until this thing blows up. We drive right into a gas station.
I can't be with you anymore.
You're gonna. Wound up.
Look at me. I just can't. You'll miss me. You'll miss the sexiness. You'll miss these big, fat, voluptuous breasts.
They're there. They ain't going away.
Yeah, I'm going away.
You're not going away. It's a thing, you know? You got Chrome. You got nunchucks. You got everything you need, baby.
When Bethesda showed this new Doom at their E3 2015 show, I thought it looked boring, bland, and uninteresting. I specifically remember wishing that the rather lengthy gameplay demo would just go away and end, so I could see Fallout 4. Then, not too long before the game's release, they threw an open multiplayer beta onto Steam, which was met with harsh user reviews. I assumed that this game would end up in the bargain bin at Walmart 2 months after launch, never to be spoken of again. That assessment ended up being completely incorrect. Doom delivers the best single-player FPS experience I've played since Wolfenstein: The New Order. Every single facet of this game, from level design to the soundtrack, is coming together to make this an unrelentingly exhilarating experience. The visuals here, not only are they highly impressive from a technical standpoint, but they manage to perfectly balance being edgy and gory with being somewhat stylized and fun. The gameplay here, the real highlight, is nothing short of phenomenal. It's unbelievably smooth with mouse and keyboard, and every single weapon is satisfying in its own way, even the plasma rifle, which took some time to grow on me. The pace at which you receive the weapons is perfect as well, ensuring that the game never gets stale over its 11-hour playtime. The most refreshing thing about this game is how it strips away all the extraneous nonsense that is so prevalent in games these days. Every gameplay mechanic is not only viable, but necessary. For instance, the brutal melee kills. They might seem simply like a visual treat, but they actually give you health packs. The chainsaw as well is a vital mechanic that gives you more ammo, in addition to helping to dispatch of the more difficult enemies. With two simple, fun mechanics, Doom manages to make something which is usually slow and flow-breaking into something that keeps the blood flowing and always keeps you moving, which is the entire point of the game. The one downside to Doom is the multiplayer, which isn't terrible, but I can see why it received such harsh feedback. It's highly modernized and might as well be Halo 4 multiplayer with a Doom coat of paint on it. It's the Tutti Fruttis to Halo 5's Fruit Loops, so there's just not much of a reason to play when it's a slapped-on derivative version of something else. Nonetheless, Doom's single player is fantastic, 9 out of 10 territory for sure. It was the first real game I played on my new monitor, and one of the best times I had in 2016. I really wanted to put Quantum Break on my list, but I just could not justify it being in my top 5, but as an honorable mention, runner-up, it makes perfect sense. I had a ton of fun playing it back when it came out, and the review was a ton of fun to make as well, but for some inexplicable reason, I just can't get this game out of my head, despite knowing that it's not an earth-shatteringly good game by any means. While some might have scoffed at the concept of embedding a television show within a video game, I found it to be brilliant in practice. I never felt bored of watching or burnt out on gameplay, and to me, that's an accomplishment. If you were to compartmentalize different aspects of Quantum Break and put them under a microscope, you would certainly find flaws. The gameplay, graphics, writing, premise, none of these elements are stand out, but that's not the point. They genuinely come together to provide an interesting, entertaining, and enjoyable experience, which is what really matters. While the writing, acting, premise, and so many other things could have been better with Quantum Break, the concept is solid and it lays the groundwork for a futuristic vision of what a single-player campaign can be like, and I certainly felt as if I had done more than simply play a game by the time I was done. They just had to do it, didn't they? They just had to have 2 Game of the Years, 2 years in a row, back to back. For me, that 2 games from the same developer can be my Game of the Year 2 years in a row is just further proof of how good From Software are. That they can differentiate 2 games that follow the same basic framework without me getting burnt out on them. From Software are clearly at the top of their craft right now, and while I try to pretend that Dark Souls 2 doesn't exist, From Software has put out 3 games since 2014. Which is probably why this is the final Dark Souls game, and why the mastermind behind these series, save for Dark Souls 2, Hidetaka Miyazaki, is shifting his focus to a brand new IP. I agree with these decisions, it's the perfect time to move on, and Dark Souls 3 is an unbelievably high note to end on. Bloodborne was like From Software's experimental noise album where they just let loose and took everything to its extremes, and it was fantastic. In contrast to that, Dark Souls 3 is a more balanced game. With Bloodborne, they had to make a few concessions and said fuck it to a lot of things such as having meaningful character builds and weapons that truly felt different and varied. The atmosphere and setting are strikingly different as well. Bloodborne's world was completely degenerate beyond all repair, while Dark Souls 3 is more poised, royal, and elegant. In terms of level design, Bloodborne was a claustrophobic, densely packed nightmare. Dark Souls 3 is a massive, sprawling fantasy dreamscape, once great and magnificent but now in decay. Its world is quite a bit different than even Dark Souls 1 and 2. With Dark Souls 1, you were getting a more high fantasy, Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones type setting. With Dark Souls 3, there's this obsession with Roman Catholic, Vatican-style imagery, and I adore it. You explore these huge churches and monasteries, and a lot of the enemies have deacon or bishop outfits on. If you were to dig into the lore of Dark Souls 3, you would find a lot of interesting things, but most players aren't going to do that. Thankfully, the game's world is portrayed with such confidence and conviction that it's captivating in and of itself. The game at no point needs to sit you down and explain itself so that you can realize the immensity of its battles and world. In the Firelink Shrine, there's empty seats for the Lords of Cinder, and the player is responsible for placing their souls on the throne. And that's all it tells you, the rest you experience firsthand. The industry is currently obsessed with immersion, with VR of course being at the forefront of that. I myself have even fallen into this trap with an ultra-wide monitor with high-end audio setups, but at the end of the day, all that technology is really secondary to intentional, convincing design. EA DICE could send a team out to Europe and have them scan the individual bricks of a castle, but if they used that data the same way they did in Star Wars Battlefront, it wouldn't matter. Dark Souls 3 was made with a different kind of attention to detail, one that makes it feel human and handcrafted. It's not the most technically accomplished, but it captivates your imagination, which is the most important thing. This is the kind of game where you sit down and lose yourself within it for hours, and even after you turn the screen off, you feel as if you've actually been there. I truly struggled between this and Doom for Game of the Year, and I decided that Dark Souls 3 was ultimately just a more engrossing, involving experience. A few months ago, I lost the save for my badass New Game Plus character after reinstalling Windows, because Dark Souls 3 is one of the few games that doesn't support Steam Cloud saves. After realizing this, I was happy to start up a brand new character and play through it all over again so I could get to the new DLC. That's when I knew that this was my favorite game of 2016.